You can spend years carrying someone else's version of who you are, until the moment a stranger sees you more clearly than your own family ever has. I learned that on a Tuesday night in September, in a private dining room that smelled like bread and roses, when a man I'd met only once before asked a question my mother had been running from for 15 years. My name is Clare Donovan. I'm 34 now. The night everything shifted, I was 2 months from my third rotation overseas, sitting at the far end of a table where I'd been introduced as something I'd never been. The call came 4 days earlier, Thursday, just after midnight. My phone screen lit up the ceiling of my apartment in North Carolina. Mom. I answered because that's reflex, because late night calls mean hospitals or accidents or something final. You can come to Nathan's engagement dinner, she said, no preamble, but don't bring up the military thing, it makes people uncomfortable. The military thing. 14 years of my life reduced to 3 words that sounded like a hobby I should have outgrown. His fiancé's father is former Air Force, she continued, a brigadier general, decorated. We don't need you, complicating things. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, barefoot, still in the shirt I'd worn to the base that day. Complicating, I repeated. You know what I mean, Claire. I did, I always had. Okay, I said. She hung up, she always hung up first. I looked across the room at my dress uniform hanging beside the closet door, the oak leaf insignia catching streetlight from the window, 3 deployment patches sewn into the sleeve. My mother didn't know, or chose not to know, that Brigadier General Marcus Webb had shaken my hand 18 months ago at Fort Bragg, that he'd handed me a unit citation in front of 200 people after a logistics operation in Kandahar that kept 4 battalions supplied through a ground offensive. She didn't know because she'd never asked what I actually did. She decided long ago what story was easier to tell. I drove 9 hours, Charlotte to Richmond, highways I knew by heart, rest stops where the coffee tastes like water and regret. I checked into a courtyard by Marriott around 8 that evening, showered, laid out my clothes for the next day, set my phone alarm for 0545 out of habit, a rhythm the Army built into me that civilian mornings never quite disrupted. At 9:17 p.m., my brother texted. Dinner tomorrow, Lavinia's on Broad Street, 7 p.m., dress code is business casual, and Claire, just, keep it light, don't get into the deployment stuff, Rachel's family is traditional. I read it twice. The deployment stuff. As if the year I spent coordinating supply routes through hostile territory was a conversation topic I couldn't read the room on. I didn't respond. I opened my suitcase instead. The black dress I'd bought specifically for this dinner lay folded beside a pair of low heels I'd worn exactly once. On the chair by the window, my service uniform, pressed, ready. 2 versions of who I could be tomorrow. I reached for the dress. Not because I was ashamed, I've never been ashamed. But because this dinner wasn't about me, it was about Nathan, about seeing my younger brother's face before I left again, this time for 11 months, this time to a place I couldn't name on a phone call. That's why I came, just to see him, that was enough. At 10:33 p.m., another text arrived, unknown number. Claire, this is Rachel, Nathan gave me your number, so excited to meet you tomorrow, quick heads up, my dad's pretty old school military, doesn't love shop talk at the dinner table, let's keep things fun and breezy. Okay? I stared at the screen. Nathan's told me so much about you. That sentence had weight. The question was what, exactly, he'd told her. I called him. He answered on the 4th ring, voice tight with that performance-ready brightness he'd used since high school. Hey, what's up? What did you tell Rachel about me? A pause, the kind where someone's deciding how much truth costs. Just, the basics, that you've been working overseas, consulting stuff, you know. Consulting. I said. Mom said it's easier that way. Rachel's dad is kind of a big deal, Claire, he doesn't need to hear about. He stopped. About what, Nathan? Silence, the kind that stretches until it becomes an answer. Just be normal tomorrow, please. He hung up. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, phone in both hands, feeling something I hadn't let myself feel in years. My brother wasn't just asking me to stay quiet. He was embarrassed by me. Not by anything I'd done. By everything I'd become. Lavinia's sat on a corner in downtown Richmond, brick facade, forest green awning, the kind of place where they fold your napkin while you're in the restroom. Private room in the back, table for 14. I arrived at 6:54, 6 minutes early, the Army trains punctuality into your bones. My mother was already there, arranging white peonies in a low centerpiece, back to the door. She wore a charcoal sheath dress and her grandmother's cameo brooch. When she turned and saw me, her eyes moved from my shoes to my neckline in one clinical sweep. Well, at least you dressed appropriately. she said. Not hello, not you look nice. Just an audit, barely passing. Nathan and Rachel arrived together a few minutes later. Rachel was petite, blonde, with the kind of smile that worked hard to put everyone at ease. She crossed the room and took both my hands. You must be the sister. Nathan said you've been overseas doing consulting work. That must be so interesting. Where were you most recently? Consulting. The word landed like a stone in still water. All over, I said, because it was true, just not in the way she thought. My mother gestured toward my seat, far end of the table, 7 chairs from the head, where a place card read Brigadier General Marcus Webb, USAF, Ret. I looked at that name. My pulse ticked upward. Marcus Webb. I knew that name. Before the Webbs arrived, my mother pulled me into the hallway. The carpet was deep red, the lighting was low and warm. She leaned close. I could smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn since I was 10. Listen carefully, she said. Rachel's family thinks Nathan comes from a stable, accomplished family. I told them you work in international logistics, corporate. If they ask, just nod and keep it vague. I blinked. You told them I work in corporate logistics? It's close enough. You coordinate supplies, don't you? I'm a major in the U.S. Army, Mum. I manage supply operations for 4 battalions in Kandahar province. She waved her hand, a small, dismissive flick, like brushing away smoke. Same concept, different terminology, just don't contradict me in there. She walked back into the dining room. I stood in that hallway for maybe 20 seconds. I'd known she minimized what I did, I'd expected that. But this was different. She hadn't downplayed my work. She'd rewritten it. She'd created a whole other version of me, one without the uniform, the rank, the deployments, the commendations, and handed that fiction to a retired general's family. She'd erased me. And she'd done it so smoothly, I realized this wasn't improvisation. She'd been telling this story long enough to believe it. I walked back in, sat down, smoothed my napkin across my lap. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to correct her. Not because I agreed. Because this dinner was Nathan's, not mine. That restraint felt noble at the time. It was also the last excuse I'd ever make for her. The front door opened at 7:09. I heard it from my seat, the low murmur of voices, then one I recognized immediately. Deep, steady, the kind of voice that had spent 30 years commanding rooms. Brigadier General Marcus Webb stepped into the private dining room with his wife, Diane, just behind him. He wore a navy blazer over a pale blue shirt, no uniform, but the way he moved, shoulders back, eyes scanning left to right before committing to a step, that was uniform enough. Diane was elegant, silver hair pulled into a low twist, pearl earrings, the calm presence of someone who'd hosted 1,000 military events and never once faltered. My mother was on her feet before they'd crossed the threshold. General Webb, what an honor. Too loud, too eager. He smiled politely. Marcus, please, I've been retired for years. He shook Nathan's hand, kissed Rachel's cheek, said something warm to her I couldn't hear. Then he looked around the table. His gaze moved across faces, my mother, Nathan's college roommate, Rachel's cousin, and stopped on me. 2 seconds, maybe 3. His brow furrowed, just slightly. A micro-expression, the kind you learn to read when your survival depends on reading people who aren't trying to be read. I knew him. Fort Bragg, 18 months ago. He'd stood at a podium in a gymnasium and called my name. I'd marched forward, saluted, and he'd pinned a unit citation on my chest. But I didn't say anything. I nodded. He nodded back. My mother took his arm and guided him toward the head of the table. The moment passed. Almost. Appetizers arrived, crab cakes, heirloom tomato salad, the kind of food you eat carefully while pretending you're relaxed. My mother ran the conversation like she ran her catering business, controlled, choreographed, no room for deviation. She talked about Richmond, the farmers' market expansion, a new event space near the river. Nathan added details where she left openings. Rachel touched his arm and smiled. It was a performance, and I was the audience member without a program. Diane Webb sat 2 seats to my left. She watched my mother with the patience of someone who'd sat through 1,000 dinners and learned to spot a performance. Then she turned to me. And what do you do, Claire? The question was gentle, genuine. My mother didn't hesitate. Oh, Claire works in international logistics, corporate consulting. She's been traveling quite a bit. You know how that industry is. Each word landed like a scalpel. Corporate consulting, traveling, that industry. I looked down at my plate. The crab cake sat golden and untouched. From the head of the table, General Webb set down his fork. He looked at me. Then at my mother. Then back at me. He picked up his water glass, took a slow sip, set it down. Said nothing. Nathan jumped in. Rachel, tell everyone about the venue you found for the reception. The subject changed. But the general's eyes didn't. Diane wasn't the type to let a thread hang. Somewhere between the appetizers being cleared and the entrees arriving, she leaned toward me again. Corporate logistics, she said warmly. That must keep you busy. What sector? I weighed my options. Lie, and become complicit. Tell the truth, and detonate my mother's entire story. Or walk the line between them. I'm based in North Carolina, I said. The work is high pressure, a lot of coordination under tight deadlines. North Carolina, lovely. Which firm? It's a government contract, actually. The word government landed softly. But it landed. Diane's eyebrows lifted just slightly. My mother's hand shot across the table, reaching for the water pitcher. Claire, could you pass that down? I passed it. Diane let it go. But General Webb didn't. I saw him from the corner of my eye. He'd pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, held it low, below the table edge. Scrolling. Searching. 3 data points, government contract, North Carolina, logistics. I watched recognition assemble itself behind his eyes. Slow, certain. Inevitable. Entrees, seared salmon for most of the table, filet mignon for Nathan, who'd never liked fish. Rachel leaned forward, elbows off the table the way a general's daughter would. So what does your day-to-day actually look like? I glanced at my mother. She was mid-sip, but her eyes locked onto mine over the rim of her wine glass. A warning. I looked back at Rachel. I make sure people have what they need, I said, equipment, resources, support, in places where those things aren't always accessible. Rachel smiled. Oh, like event logistics for remote locations? Nathan cut in before I could answer. Something like that. I set my fork down, picked it up, set it down again. Something like that, I echoed. Under the table, my hand drifted to the inner pocket of my blazer. I felt the edge of the challenge coin through the fabric. Heavy, round, cool. General Webb had handed it to me the same day he'd pinned the citation. A tradition. You don't buy a challenge coin, you earn it, or someone who matters gives you one. I carried it the way some people carry a photograph of someone they've lost. Not to show anyone. Just to remember it was real. Across the table, the general was staring at his phone. Not scrolling anymore. Just staring. His jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. Between the entrees and dessert, Diane excused herself to the restroom. My mother followed. I knew exactly what was about to happen. I learned later, from Diane herself, what was said. Diane had leaned against the marble counter, reapplying lipstick, and said casually, "Your daughter has remarkable composure, very measured, unusual for someone in corporate consulting." My mother adjusted an earring in the mirror. Claire's always been reserved, not terribly ambitious, if I'm honest. Nathan's the driven one. Diane pressed gently. She mentioned government contracts. Is she working on a military installation? And my mother, the woman who'd raised 2 children alone after my father died, who built a catering business from nothing, who ironed her own linens and made her own pasta dough, looked Diane Webb in the face and said, "Something like that. She's never been very clear about her work, you know how some people are." Diane smiled, nodded. But something didn't sit right. And Diane Webb had spent 30 years as a military spouse. She knew when a briefing didn't add up. When they returned, Diane leaned close to her husband's ear. I couldn't hear what she said. But I saw his face. He closed his eyes. Opened them. Looked directly at me. And I knew he wasn't guessing anymore. Here's what General Webb found on his phone. I didn't learn this until weeks later, when he told me over coffee at his home in Arlington. But I'll tell you now, because the timing matters. Somewhere between Diane's first question and my mother's hallway lie, the general opened his photo library and typed one word into the search bar. Donovan. For results, all from the same day. A ceremony at Fort Bragg, 18 months prior. In the first photo, he stood at a podium reading a citation. In the second, he was shaking hands with a young officer. In the third, the one that mattered, he was pinning a unit citation onto the dress uniform of Major Clare Donovan. My face was in profile, hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes forward, shoulders square. He zoomed in. Then he looked up. At me. The same woman sitting at the end of a table in a black dress, being introduced as a corporate consultant who'd been drifting. Same face, same posture, same stillness under pressure. He told me later his first reaction wasn't anger. It was confusion. He couldn't understand why a mother would erase her daughter's service. In his world, the world of sacrifice, deployment, folded flags, and gold star families, a child who serves is a child you honor. You put the decal on your car. You frame the promotion photo. You tell strangers at the grocery store. You don't pretend she works for a consulting firm. He set the phone face down on the table. Straightened his napkin. Looked at Diane. She looked back. 30 years of marriage in one glance. Then he waited. Because a general knows when to act, and when to let the moment find its own shape. Dessert plates were arriving, chocolate tranche, raspberry coulis, when my mother stood and walked the length of the table. Past Nathan's chair, past Rachel's cousin, past the empty seat where Diane's wrap hung. She stopped beside me. Leaned down. Spoke close to my ear. Her breath smelled like Chardonnay. "You're doing fine," she whispered. "Just stay quiet through the toast and we're done." There it was again. Stay quiet. The same instruction from the phone call, the same leash. I haven't said a word, Mom. Good, that's all I'm asking. I looked at her. Really looked. She was 60 years old. Her makeup was flawless, her brooch was straight. And her hands were trembling. Not much. Just at the fingertips. Like someone holding something too heavy and pretending it's light. "No," I said quietly, "that's not all you're asking. You're asking me to disappear." Her chin lifted. "Don't be dramatic." She walked back to her seat. I watched her go. She smoothed her dress, sat down, cut a precise triangle from her tranche, placed it in her mouth. The most controlled performance I'd ever seen. And I realized something I should have realized years ago. My silence wasn't respect. It was complicity. Every time I stayed quiet, I helped her maintain a lie. Every nodded confirmation, every something like that. I'd been an accomplice in my own erasure. But I still didn't speak. Because this dinner was Nathan's. Not mine. That restraint felt noble. It was also the last excuse I'd ever make. Nathan seized the lull between dessert and coffee. I saw it coming, the way he straightened his tie, the way he leaned toward the general's end of the table. "Sir, I don't know if Rachel mentioned, I'm launching a financial planning practice here in Richmond. We specialize in services for military families, retirement strategies, education benefits, estate planning. It's an underserved market." The general listened. 30 years of command had taught him to let people talk long enough to reveal themselves. "That's meaningful work," the general said. "Military families need advocates." Nathan beamed. "Exactly, and I'd love to connect with some of your network, if you know anyone who might benefit from." "How much do you know about military life, Nathan?" The question was quiet. Almost gentle. But it stopped Nathan cold. "Well, I've done extensive research. I've read case studies, interviewed veterans at the research," the general said. He nodded slowly. Then he looked at me. Not a glance. A look. The kind that carries a full sentence inside it. He looked at the woman who'd coordinated supply chains in a combat zone, who'd served under his command, who'd earned a citation by keeping soldiers equipped under fire. Then he looked back at the man who wanted to sell those same soldiers financial products. "Research is a start," the general said evenly. "Experience is better." Nathan laughed nervously. The table moved on. But the general's point had been made. And everyone paying attention had heard it. Including me. When people started shifting seats for coffee, Diane moved beside me. She did it casually, the way a seasoned military spouse does everything, with purpose disguised as warmth. She stirred her coffee, once, twice. Then, "You said government contract and logistics, and you sit like someone who's been told to sit up straight 10,000 times. She paused. "Are you military, Claire?" I held her gaze. She had kind eyes, and a spine that didn't bend. I'd seen that combination on the faces of 100 military spouses, women who'd held families together through deployments and relocations and middle-of-the-night calls from the other side of the world. Women who knew what service cost because they'd paid it too. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm not going to lie to you at your daughter's engagement dinner." "Then don't." "I'm a major, Quartermaster Corps, U.S. Army." She set her coffee cup down. Carefully. Like she was afraid she might drop it. "You're active duty." "Yes, ma'am. And your family introduced you as a corporate consultant." I said it flat. No bitterness, no sarcasm. Just the fact, laid on the table like a card I decided to finally show. Diane's hand went to her chest. She looked across the room at my mother, who was laughing at something Rachel's cousin had said. Then she looked back at me. "Does Marcus know?" "I think he's figuring it out." She stood, squeezed my shoulder once. walked to the general's side. I watched her lean down, whisper something in his ear. 4 seconds. The general listened without moving. Then he set down his cup, folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and stood. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said. The room went still. Not polite still. Real still. The kind where forks stop mid-air and conversations die mid-syllable. My mother smiled. I could see it from 7 seats away. The smile she'd been engineering all night. The general was about to bless the engagement, about to say something gracious about Nathan and Rachel and the future. This was her moment. The one that made the lying worth it. "I'd like to start," the general said, with something unexpected. He held his glass at chest height. "Not raised yet. A military tell, you don't raise the glass until you're ready for people to drink." He wasn't ready. "I've spent 32 years in the United States Air Force," he said. His voice filled the room without effort, "and in that time, I've learned you can tell everything about a family by how they treat each other when they think no one important is watching." He let that settle. My mother's smile held. But something behind it shifted. "Nathan, Rachel." He looked at them, warmth in his eyes, genuine. "I'm proud of you both. Marriage is a campaign. It requires strategy, sacrifice, and above all, honesty." He said the word honesty the way a judge says guilty. With finality. With weight. And no interest in debate. "Tonight," the general continued, "I want to talk about honesty." My mother's smile flickered. "Just at the edges." The general set his glass down, pushed his chair back, and began to walk. Not toward Nathan and Rachel. Not toward the head of the table. He walked slowly, deliberately, down the length of the table. Past Nathan's roommate. Past Rachel's cousin. Past the empty dessert plates and crumpled napkins. Toward me. Each step registered. My mother turned in her seat, tracking him. "Marcus," she said, voice climbing half an octave, "the kids are at the other end." He didn't stop. 5 steps. 6. 7. The room contracted with each one. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Not from fear. From recognition. This was the moment. The one I hadn't engineered, hadn't asked for. But the one I'd earned simply by showing up and telling the truth to the one person who'd cared enough to ask. He stopped directly in front of me. I looked up. He looked down. We held eye contact for 3 full seconds. The length of a salute. The length of a breath before you step off a ledge. Under the table, my hand found the challenge coin in my pocket. I pressed my thumb against the eagle on its face. "Good evening," the general said. His voice was gentle, but it carried to every corner of the room. "I'm surprised to see you here." "Good evening, General," I said, quiet, steady, the voice I use when it matters. He nodded once. Then louder, loud enough for my mother, for Nathan, for Rachel, for every person at that table. "Who are you to them?" The question detonated silently. The way real explosions do. Light before sound. And for a fraction of a second, everything was perfectly still. Every head turned. My mother was half out of her chair. She's my daughter, Marcus. She works in." The general raised one hand. Palm open, fingers straight. The command gesture. Universal, unmistakable. My mother stopped. "Major?" The word landed on the table like a dropped glass. "Would you state your name and unit for everyone at this table?" I stood. Chair back, shoulders square. Not at attention, I wasn't in uniform. But close enough that every person at that table could feel the difference between someone who'd learned to stand in a dining room and someone who'd learned to stand on a parade ground. "Major Clare Donovan," I said, 2nd Quartermaster Battalion, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The silence was total. Not uncomfortable. Not awkward. The kind of silence that happens when the ground shifts and no one knows where the walls are anymore. Rachel looked at Nathan, mouth open. Nathan looked at my mother. My mother looked at the tablecloth. The general turned to face the room. "I presented this woman with a unit citation 18 months ago at Fort Bragg," he said. His voice was calm, precise. "For exceptional leadership during a 12-month deployment to Kandahar province. She coordinated logistics for 4 battalions under hostile conditions. Not once did a critical resupply fail under her command." He paused. "Let it land." "And tonight," he said, "her own family introduced her to me as a corporate consultant." The word corporate cracked open like an egg against a counter. Clean, final, impossible to put back together. I could feel the air rearrange itself. The general's friends looked at my mother. Rachel's cousin looked at Nathan. Diane looked at me with an expression that was equal parts fury and heartbreak. And my mother, Patricia Donovan, 60 years old, catering business owner, pearl-wearing, perfectly composed Patricia, sat frozen in her chair. With nothing, for the first time in her life, to say. The dam broke slowly. My mother stood. Her chair scraped against hardwood. A sound like nails on slate. "Marcus, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said. "I never said, I just simplified things for conversation. You know how it is at dinner parties, people don't want to hear about." Simplified? The general didn't look at her, he was still facing the table. "Mrs. Donovan, you told my wife your daughter lacks ambition, you said she's been drifting." Diane spoke for the first time, quiet, precise. "Those were your exact words, Patricia, not terribly ambitious, those were the words you used." My mother's eyes went to Nathan. Looking for backup. Looking for the son who always stayed, who always agreed, who always carried her narrative. Nathan was staring at his hands. His phone sat face up on the table. The last text he'd sent me was still visible. "Please don't make this weird." He couldn't look at me. My mother's voice cracked. Not from tears. From pressure. Like a pipe holding too much for too long. "You don't understand our family, General. Claire left us. She chose to leave when I needed her most. She chose the army over her own mother." She was shaking now. The composure she'd built her entire identity around, peeling away in layers. And underneath was something raw, old, honest. But she didn't know how to stop. She never had. The general looked at me. "Major, would you like to say something?" I stood again. I'd sat back down at some point, instinct, maybe. I stood. And I looked at the table. At Rachel, whose engagement dinner had just become something else entirely. At Nathan, who still couldn't meet my eyes. At Diane, who had tears running silently down her face. At the general, who stood beside me like a witness at a trial. Then at my mother. "I enlisted in the United States Army at 19, I said. My voice was level, clear, the voice I use when I'm briefing a commander, when every word has to carry its own weight. "I earned my commission through ROTC at 22, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I've deployed twice to Afghanistan and once to Iraq. I've managed supply operations in combat zones where the nearest backup was a helicopter and a prayer." I paused. Not for drama. For breath. "Mom told you I'm a corporate consultant. She told you I've been drifting. She's been telling people that story for 14 years. To neighbors, to Nathan's friends, to you." I looked at my mother. "I didn't come here tonight to correct you, Mom. I came because Nathan is my brother and I wanted to see him before I deploy again in 8 weeks. That's it. That's the only reason I drove 9 hours." I sat down. Placed my hands flat on the table. "Done." My mother was leaning against the back of her chair like it was the only thing holding her upright. Her mouth moved. Nothing came out. She looked the way a building looks the second before it drops. Still standing. But empty of everything that held it together. She walked out. Not dramatically, not with a door slam. She just stood, pressed her napkin to the table, and walked out. I followed. Not to fight. Not to finish her off. Because I saw something in her face I hadn't seen in 14 years. Fear. Not the performed kind, not the theatrical worry about seating charts and centerpieces. Real fear. The kind that lives under everything else. She was in the hallway, leaning against the wall near the restroom. Her hands were trembling. This time she wasn't hiding it. She reached into her purse. Pulled out a photograph. Wallet-sized, laminated, edges soft from years of handling. I knew it before I saw the face. I'd seen it once before, years ago, in a drawer I wasn't supposed to know about. Her mother. My grandmother. A young woman in a nurse's uniform, hair pinned back, looking at the camera with an expression that was half smile, half departure. She'd left when my mother was 12, said she needed more than Roanoke could offer, took a nursing position in Boston. Never came back. Never called on birthdays. Never explained. "She left when I was younger than you were when you enlisted," my mother said. Her voice was stripped down to something I barely recognized. "She said she had to go. She said it was important. She looked just like you when she said it." She touched the photograph with her thumb. "When you enlisted, I saw her in you, the same certainty, the same resolve." She paused. Like the door was already closing. "So you made sure I had nothing to come back to," I said. She didn't answer. She just stood there. Holding a photograph of a woman who left. Raised by a woman who couldn't forgive leaving. Raising a daughter she punished for the same thing. I walked back inside. The general was standing at the head of the table. Waiting. Not out of patience. Out of precision. He knew exactly what he was doing. "I'd like to finish my toast," he said. Nobody argued. My mother came back in, sat down, didn't look at anyone. I said marriage requires honesty, the general continued, so does family, and tonight I've witnessed a family with a daughter who has served her country with distinction, and a mother who erased that service to impress strangers. The sentence landed like a gavel. Clean, final. My mother flinched. A full-body flinch. Nathan was gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white. Rachel looked at him. The kind of look that asks a question no one wants to answer. "You knew?" "The only embarrassment I see at this table," the general said, "is a mother who erased her own daughter's service." He said it calmly, the way a man says something he's thought for 2 hours and decided to say exactly once. He picked up his glass. "To Nathan and Rachel, may your marriage be built on truth, even when the truth is hard." He drank. Diane drank. I drank. Nathan lifted his glass with a hand that wasn't steady. My mother didn't touch hers. After the toast, the general walked to my end of the table one more time. He stood in front of me while the rest of the room sat. "Major Donovan," he said, "I remember your ceremony clearly. You'd just returned from Kandahar, 12 months managing logistics for 4 battalions under fire, fuel, rations, medical supplies, ammunition, in conditions that would have broken most officers." He paused. "When I presented you with that citation, you said something I wrote down that evening. You said, 'It's not about recognition, sir, it's about getting it done.'" He let it settle. "Tonight, you deserve to be recognized." He extended his hand. I shook it. Firm grip, warm palm, 3 seconds. Diane stood and placed her hand on my shoulder. Squeezed once. "A mother should be the first person to tell the world who her daughter is," Diane said. She looked at my mother when she said it. Not with anger. With something worse. Pity. "I'm sorry yours didn't." I nodded. My throat was tight, my eyes were wet. But I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of those people. Not because crying is weak. I've cried in a supply tent at 3 in the morning when a convoy was hit and didn't come back. But because this room didn't deserve my tears. My tears were mine. The same way my service was mine. The same way my name was mine. I turned to my mother. She was sitting in her chair, hands in her lap, fingers interlaced, knuckles white. Her brooch had shifted, her makeup was intact. But her face beneath it had collapsed. I kept my mouth shut. "Mom," I said, "for 14 years, the general didn't." She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "Nothing." "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm not going to yell at you in front of these people. That's not who I am. That was never who I am." I paused. "But I need you to hear this. I am done being the daughter you wish I was instead of the one I actually am." I picked up my purse. Reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. Pulled out the challenge coin. Held it for a moment, felt the weight, the eagle on one side, the battalion crest on the other. Then I placed it on the table. Directly in front of her. "That's from General Webb," I said. "He gave it to me the day he gave me the citation you never asked about. Keep it. Maybe it'll help you remember who I am next time you introduce me." I straightened my blazer. Looked at Nathan, who was standing near the door now, jaw working, eyes wet. Looked at Rachel, who was watching Nathan the way you watch someone you're not sure you know anymore. Looked at the general. He gave me a single nod. I walked out. Nathan caught up to me in the parking lot. "Claire, wait, don't leave like this." I turned. He was standing under a streetlight, tie loosened, face flushed, looking younger than 26 and older than I'd ever seen him. "Like what, Nathan?" I didn't know she told them all that. I mean, I knew she said some stuff, but I didn't know she made up a whole. "You knew enough," I said. "You told me not to talk about the deployment stuff. You told Rachel I'd been doing consulting work. You didn't lie as big as Mom, but you carried her bags." I was trying to protect. "Protect what?" I said. "Your pitch to her dad?" He didn't answer. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at the ground, at his shoes, at the cracks in the asphalt. Anywhere but at me. "Nathan," I said, "I love you, you're my brother, but I can't keep being the person this family is ashamed of when there's nothing to be ashamed of." He looked up, eyes wet, chin trembling. "When you're ready to know who I actually am, not who Mom told you I am, you know where to find me. Fort Bragg, 2nd Quartermaster Battalion. I'm not hard to find." I got in the car. Closed the door. Started the engine. He stood in the parking lot light for a long time. watching me pull away. I learned later what happened after I left. Rachel pulled Nathan into a corner. Her voice was low, but her words carried the precision of a woman raised by a general. You told me she was a drifter, Nathan. She's a major in the United States Army. You lied to me. I didn't lie. I let Mom handle the story. That is the lie. She walked back to her father's side. Nathan stood alone near the bread station, looking at the empty chair where I'd been sitting. At the challenge coin still sitting on the table in front of my mother's untouched glass. The general spoke last. He addressed my mother directly, standing, hands at his sides. Mrs. Donovan, I respect your son, I care for my daughter, and I wish your family well, but I need to say something. He paused. I've commanded thousands of airmen in my career. I can tell you without hesitation that Major Donovan is someone I'd trust with lives. The fact that you couldn't see that, that's not her failure, it's yours. My mother sat alone at the table after that. The servers cleared plates around her. The white peonies she'd arranged 2 hours earlier were starting to droop. She didn't move, didn't cry. She just sat there, holding the challenge coin in her palm, looking at it like she'd never seen one before. I sat in my rental car for 5 minutes before I drove. Engine running, headlights on. The Blue Ridge Mountains framed in the windshield like a postcard from a place I used to live. My phone rang. Diane Webb. Major Donovan, I wanted to make sure you're all right. I appreciate that, Mrs. Webb. I'm okay. A pause, warmth in it. What you did in there, the restraint, the way you kept your composure while your own mother was. She stopped herself, started again. That took more courage than anything I've seen at a dinner table, and I've sat at a lot of dinner tables. Thank you, ma'am. For what it's worth, Marcus and I would be honored to have you at our table, anytime, you hear me? Anytime. I closed my eyes. That sentence, from a military spouse, from a woman who understood what service meant because she'd lived beside it for 3 decades. That sentence meant more than every word my mother had withheld for 14 years. Not because Diane Webb was important. Because she was honest. I'll remember that, ma'am, I said. Thank you. I hung up. Sat in the quiet. Looked at the restaurant in the rearview mirror one last time. The lights were still on. People were still inside. Rearranging the rubble of an evening that had started as an engagement dinner and ended as an unraveling. I put the car in drive. 9 hours back to Fort Bragg. I didn't play music. I drove in silence. And somewhere on I-85 between Richmond and the North Carolina state line, I said it out loud to no one. I know exactly who I am to them, and who I am without them. The road unspooled ahead of me. Dark, straight, mine. 3 weeks later, I was back at Fort Bragg. Morning briefings, supply coordination, deployment prep. The routine that held me together, the way it always had. Nathan called twice. I answered the second time. He apologized, not the full apology, not the one that reaches all the way to the root, but enough to crack a door. Megan made me tell her everything, he said, about the Army, about your deployments, about what Mom's been saying for years. She said if I can't be honest about my own sister, how can she trust me to be honest about anything? They were still engaged. But Rachel had set a condition. Nathan had to rebuild a relationship with me. On my terms, not my mother's, not his. Mine. My mother hadn't called. I expected that. Her pattern was silence. When confronted with a truth she couldn't control, she went quiet. Just like her own mother had. She never saw the parallel. I didn't chase her. For the first time in 14 years, I didn't pick up the phone and try to bridge the gap she'd built. For the first time, I let the silence be hers to break. One thing arrived in the mail. A handwritten note on cream stationery, no return address. 2 sentences in steady, practiced handwriting. Major Donovan, your service honors us all. Never let anyone reduce what you've earned. M.W. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Next to my deployment orders. Right where I could see it every morning. I spent 14 years letting my mother's version of me be the only story anyone heard. Then one evening, at a dinner table in Richmond, Virginia, a retired general asked a simple question. And I learned that the people who truly see you don't need your silence to be comfortable around you. They just need your honesty. And sometimes, that's the only thing worth protecting. If this story reminded you that your service, whatever form it takes, matters even when the people closest to you refuse to see it, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening.